Thank you very much for finding time to join us. And for me, it's a great honor to start this conference with your speech. Yes, I'm very happy to be able to take part in this opening of the conference, to be among the first speakers of this conference. I'm always a little bit worrying about that, but probably I'll be not only useful, but also will be able to inspire other participants with my stories. Perfect. Sergey will tell us how we can use Smysloton or MeaningTon and how to make value statement meaningful for employees. Let's support Sergey with exclamation marks, with flame emojis. So I expected that the presentation would be in English, but it's in Russian, so I can recognize the pages of the presentation. And the topic of my speech today is how to make value statements meaningful. Well, Artem, we can say, has already touched upon this topic, so you probably already know about that. So we need to use stories, but devil is always in details, as we all know. So let's talk about these details. And I suggest that we start with the following. In your opinion, for you, the term management based on values, what is it about? Is it about employees receiving more freedom in decision-making, or is it about having more control over the conduct and behavior of employees? So you can just put a number in the chat, 1 or 2, referring to the circle on the screen. So you can see that the majority are for the freedom. I see. Someone has even a third idea. That would be great if we were able to discover something new, a third option. And some people are talking about combining these two. So the majority are for circle 1. So it's about delegating decision-making to the employees. For me, when I first I started thinking about value-based management, that was my main target. I had an MBA on strategic management studies, and when I was working on my qualification work, it seemed to me that there was a bottleneck for me, because all the key issues in my professional life I would be responsible for them, and I didn't have enough time for that. And it was really painful when not all the decisions that were made, I didn't agree with all the decisions that were made in the organization, and I didn't know what to do about all that. So I thought that maybe what makes me and what gives me the ability to make stronger decisions, I started to think about this idea, and I realized that I have a set of values that enable me to do so. So for me personally, the right answer is circle 1, but what did I come across? I came across that in many organizations, they can declare circle 1, but what in fact is in place is circle 2. So I'm going to tell you some of the stories based on my experience. What am I going to talk about in my speech? In the first block of my presentation, I'll present 2 visions, 2 approaches to values description, and I'll tell you about the differences of these 2 approaches. Why the story is a perfect form to state about the values, and also I'll tell you about the Smysloton or about the MeaningTon. It's the format of creative generation of stories. So the stories, they're generated within an organization by employees themselves. So let me start with a very interesting case. For me, it's a very indicative case. In one of an organization, there was a value, entrepreneurial spirit. The company included all the values in the corporate code. Everything was listed, everything was described, what the entrepreneurial spirit is, and we were invited to create an explanation video about that. Well, it's clear that the video should be full of details so that there would be some concrete examples. Where can we get those examples from? So when I was preparing for the session, I was trying to think where I could get these concrete examples from. So I needed to propose something for the participants of the session. So I proposed the following. Why don't we compare the entrepreneurial spirit with the manager spirit and with other types of spirit? So I decided to choose a number of criteria: attitude to money, to time, to people, to problems, and to tasks. What is interesting? This table looks very simple, but we were able to fill it out in just half an hour. So you can do it yourself if you like. And at some point of the time, I started to worry because what I saw is that, well, the participants didn't notice it yet at that time, but I realized that they, in the entrepreneurial spirit, in that column, the participants were generating ideas that were not in line with the corporate code. But in the corporate code, the deciphering of the entrepreneurial spirit, the term was very different. So it was in line with what we have in blue in the manager spirit, in the very middle of the table. So we still completed the task. And once we saw these discrepancies, we were able to understand that for an entrepreneur, people are the assets and employees are the assets. Assets create value for the company. Clients is the asset. The horizon, it's the horizon of the planning. In other words, it's the horizon in which you consider some events. If you know the Adizes theory, an entrepreneur is someone who has a very long horizon of planning, and they are focusing on the result. For an entrepreneur, people are the asset. For the manager, it's the resource. We know that HR, it's human resources. So unfortunately, what we were able to see is that there was this discrepancy at place. On the one hand, we were a little bit confused because it turned out that employees had a different idea of what the entrepreneurial spirit is from the ideas that were enlisted in the code, in the corporate code. And on the other hand, at the same time, we were able to realize that there are small discrepancies, small differences, and there's a conflict between the manager and the entrepreneur stance. And based on this conflict, we can create a story. If you have some questions, and if these questions are going to be about the horizon, the long horizon, I'll answer these questions, but I'd like to focus more on the meaning today in my speech. Once we were able to see these differences, these discrepancies, the story is prolonged. Some people started saying, well, I built a cottage and someone recommended recommended me to save money, and I could use different devices in order to reduce the electricity use, and they delegated this task to a contract worker, and this contract worker analyzed the market, and there was only one worker who was able to do it on the second day for 30,000 rubles, but there was also another worker who was ready to do it in 2 weeks, but for 15,000 rubles. So the contract worker made the decision that the work will be done in 2 weeks for 15,000 rubles. So they don't have an investment approach. They are looking at the expenses and they're trying to minimize the budget, but it's a very specific situation because, but for the entrepreneur, profits are important, and as a result, we saw a lot of information that came out in the form of stories. But if from the very beginning you just come up to them and ask them what is an entrepreneurial spirit for you, they would talk about the socially acceptable norms, everything that they read in the corporate code because they prepared for the meeting. Why does it happen? Why? How do codes appear? And why do they work in such a strange way? Usually, values can be divided into skills, and then skills and competences are divided into indicators of behavior or conduct, which can be evaluated, assessed, and then you can work with all that. Because it's the reality that can be observed, but what is happening in someone's mind, no one knows. So this is the first behavioral approach. And in my opinion, this generates these strange codes that have no meaning. On the other hand, I'd like to draw your attention to another fact. I'm sure you've seen this manifesto, the Agile Manifest, and it's formulated the following way. People and interaction is more important than processes and tools. The working product is more important than the comprehensive documentation. Cooperation with the client is more important than agreeing on the terms of the contract. Being prepared to the change is more important than following the original plan, and that's usually the end of it. But 2 lines are no less important. We do not deny the importance of what is on the right, but what is on the left is a priority for us. In other words, we are not saying that processes, documentation is something useless, but when we need to make a choice, we prioritize what is on the left. And I'd like you to have a look at this idea from the point of view of constructivism. We can project this agile idea. Let's think about it. How could it be? So there are 2 focuses of attention: a client, a team, a product, and change. There are some basic values, something that's at the very base, something that we cannot do without. You need to agree on the terms of the contract with the client. Without that, we won't be able to work. Team needs to understand what processes and what tools are going to be used to implement the terms of the contract. In order to understand what product is going to be like, we need to describe this product through documents. Documentation is something we're going to rely on. As for the change, it's working with the risks. Change is usually bad because we have already decided to work upon something, but then something deviates from the plan. But when we're talking about the agile, it turns out that people and cooperation is more important. Cooperation with the client is more important, and the working product is more important. And then we prioritize ideas. And here I'd like to suggest that we do this exercise. Some people criticize agile because it gives us some way of agile behavior or agile management of projects. But at the same time, it doesn't give us an idea of where we're going to. It does not give us the strategic prospects. So this is what mainly critics are saying about agile. But the agile approach is really good. So we can think about what Agile 2, the second version of Agile, the updated version of Agile, would look like. Something should be important than the working project. Something should be more important than being ready for changes, and so on. Once I realized it, I decided to Google and try to find what these phrasings would look like. So indeed, there is Agile 2, Agile 1, and huge organizations. They create their own manifestos based on agile ideas, but they look more or less the same. As for product, business value is more important than a working product. In terms of the client, building partnership is more important than cooperation with the client. But indeed, there is a question, what is the difference between cooperation with the client and building the partnership? But these are very thin differences. Or teamwork and responsibility is more important than people and cooperation and engagement with them. And active preparation for change is more important than just being ready for change. So it enables you to anticipate the change and be proactive. So based on that, we can see that statement or rather value statement gives us a clear understanding of priorities and the value choice. This value-based choice should happen. And then there are several formulas for that. The first formula is what we have in the Agile Manifesto. Norm A is more important than Norm B. But also there's another interesting formula, and I've created it myself a couple of years ago, and I've seen that some people use it, which is A, even if we need to sacrifice B. So it's the price and the value. In marketing, we always have this ratio of price and value. And then in this case, B is more important in the case of conflict, and the definition of conflict is the basis here. And also I'd like to offer you a definition which blew me away by its briefness, but its clearness. It's a definition from Storyonomica book by Robert Mackey. The essence of any good story that has ever been created and told by people can be expressed by 3 words. Conflict changes life. That's why the fundamental definition says, story is a dynamic escalation of the events driven by the conflict, which cause important change in the life of the main character. In other words, what we're able to identify in the entrepreneurial spirit, these are the essence ideas. Conflict is the essence, and we need to detect it between 2 ideas. It can be between internal values. It can be between values and fears. It can be an internal conflict. So there is a whole map of detecting internal conflicts. And once we detect this conflict, the story starts to work and it becomes meaningful. And I'd like to ask Artem to help me and demonstrate a video. It's a story that was visualized, it was created by Smysloton or MeaningTon, and then I'll move on to tell you about what MeaningTon is.
Кристалл сервис интеграция. Ценность – коммуникабельность. Мы компания-интегратор. Обычно клиенты приходят к нам с мечтой достроить свой сказочный замок. Им кажется, что для воплощения мечты не хватает всего-то нескольких кирпичей в основании. Наша система по переводу мечты в реальность построена так. Десятки команд. Каждая выполняет свою часть работы. Мы режем, сверлим, шлифуем и продаем клиенту наше воплощение его мечты. При этом удовлетворенность клиента для нас – ключевой показатель. Однажды клиент обратился к менеджеру и захотел приобрести наш продукт. Менеджер так хотел продать побыстрее, что не слышал истинную цель клиента. Из боязни потерять клиента не рассказал об ограничениях системы и требованиях к масштабированию, но сделку заключил. Благодаря нашему продукту мечта клиента осуществилась, у него выросла прибыль. На волне успеха клиент начал стремительно расширяться. И однажды ночью система захлебнулась, кассы не получили новые цены. Зная о профессионализме нашей команды, клиент направляет заявку. Инженер поддержки, не осознав масштабов проблемы, попытался починить самостоятельно, но через несколько часов отчаялся и решил откатить обратно, чем еще больше сломал систему. Зайдя в тупик, он разбудил своего знакомого разработчика. Сонный программист решил проблему как понял, подключился и удалил с сервера ненужные файлы. Система заработала, цены провалились на кассе, проблему решили. Заявку закрыли, клиенту доложили и все легли спать. Через неделю обнаружилось, что файлы, которые удалил сонный разработчик, были с информацией о масштабных новогодних акциях. Покупатели возвращали товары за обмана со скидками и уходили к конкурентам, потеряв доверие к магазину. Подведя итог, клиент не досчитался 20 миллионов рублей и предложил нам их восполнить. Вернуть доверие стоило нам недели сверхурочной работы всех команд. Казалось бы, избегая сложностей коммуникации, мы экономим немного времени и нервов. Однако, подкармливая страхи показаться некомпетентными, быть непонятыми или неуслышанными, потерять имидж, мы рискуем потерять все сразу – время, деньги, репутацию. Оказывается, если бы менеджер узнал у архитектора особенности работы системы и сумел аккуратно донести их до клиента, он заложил бы бюджет на возможность масштабирования. Если бы инженер не побоялся показаться некомпетентным и сразу доложил о реальных масштабах проблемы руководству, то компания не допустила бы потери доверия. Если бы разработчик не постеснялся разбудить коллегу из другой команды, то удалось бы избежать потери важных данных. Коммуникабельность стирает грань между желанием и результатом, сохраняет наше время и время клиента, дает ключ к принятию правильных и профессиональных решений, профессиональному воплощению мечты клиента.
So this story was created by Smysloton. You can see the names of the participants of Smysloton. Rather, it's one of the teams of the Smysloton who developed the story. It was interesting. It's an IT team. They're all for rational decisions, and indeed, they were skeptical indeed from the very beginning in terms of the stories, in terms of the values. They didn't believe that stories would tell them something they didn't know. But by the end of the day, when they realized what conflict is, when they saw all of the circumstances and connected everything like dots into one chain of events, we were able to create this interesting video. But once we were able to see the video, we raised the question, do we need to tell about our failures? But they decided that honesty for them is one of the basic values. And they decided they are ready to talk about their mistakes. For them, it's important not making or not making mistakes, but for them, it's important that they are working on their mistakes to become better. So hence the story. And Artem said that creating stories is easy, that anyone can narrate a story about their weekend and so on. That's true. And on the one hand, I do agree that You cannot frustrate people by saying that telling a story is complicated, it's difficult, but I've been working on stories for many years. A story is like a canvas because we create connections between meanings, and any text of any story, especially if the story is good, it is interconnected. It's a comprehensive story. It has its wholeness, integrity. So for moderators, for storytellers, professional storytellers, it is great to know what a story consists of and to know about that on a deep level. So that's how the working process at Smysloton looks like. We work with different companies, and you can see teamwork. In teams, people discuss things, they delve into issues, and for them it's really interesting. And as a result of this work, we can create videos like the one we've just seen. So Smysloton, it's an event. We've created this word. It's like you receive a task, and in an intensive format, you need to create something. Smysloton can be dedicated to corporate values, to projects, to initiatives, to security and safety rules. Most importantly is that people explain the meanings to themselves by creating stories, by creating such videos. This video was created by a professional designer, but people also use a special software to create videos themselves, and they can do it just in one day. As a result, what do we have? We create videos as artifacts of corporate culture through which we can tell stories, we can use them, and these videos are emotional, and they give us a clear understanding of what meaning is behind the video. And when we have such sessions, creative sessions called Smyslotons, sometimes it turns out that those who created values, they had different meanings in their mind, but as a result, we can see the change of values. So Sberbank had the initial value to be oriented, to be focused on the client, but it turns out this the external people are clients for them, but the internal ones are not clients for them. And through the story, it became obvious. So in other words, it also has a diagnostic function. It enables you to see advantages and disadvantages, your weak and strong points. And those who create videos, they also get involved emotionally. And by the end of Smysloton, of such sessions, we have a festival when we're able to see the videos that we have been working upon. And we watch videos after videos, and it's really amazing because it's not the first Smysloton, it's not the first session I've seen, I've moderated. So sometimes it's really touching, and people who've gone through Smysloton sessions, they become really mature, they do understand what is behind Smysloton. So I think that is the end of the main part, of the major part of my presentation. I'll be happy to answer your questions. For several times I repeated the name, or rather the word horizon and long horizon, and probably you have a question, what do I mean by a long horizon? I like to specify, and I'll refer to Adizes. One of the basic notions of Adizes, it's the life cycle. Everything has life cycle, a business model, a product, and so on. Life cycle has the S shape. The theory of decisions, theory also studied the life cycles of technical solutions. If we consider a technical solution or the length of its life cycle, in the short term it means that you are in a particular point and you are in this point, but as for long horizon, you're in a particular point, you don't have anything, but you look into the future and you believe that at some time there will be growth. You'll be able to find your target audience. You'll be able to find your own way of explaining the meaning of your product, the value of your product to the audience, and this gives you energy. But for an administrator, what's important is here and now, unlike the manager. So if the administrator does not get the result here and now, it's the so-called death zone for them. So there are 4 main blocks. Manager Sergay from Altuna told about that. You need to speak a specific language with each person you're talking to. So in terms of horizons of planning, there's also its own language. And Irina also says that for Facilitators Association, who held an online Smysloton, we held this session for them. It was dedicated to strategic planning through story creation.
Сергей, у меня есть вопрос.
Sergey, I have a question.
Давай постараемся в диалоге, чтобы
Yes,
нашим
shoot.
коллегам-переводчикам было попроще. Вопрос такой. Я знаю,
I have a
что
question.
бывает так,
I
что
know that sometimes
описание ценностей в виде тезисов превращаются в
the description of
социально
values through
желательные ответы. Бывало ли
short
так, что
phrases
люди
turned
начинают
into
рассказывать
socially
социально
desirable
желательные
answers?
истории? И
Has
если
it
да, то
ever
как это
happened that
предотвратить?
people start telling you the socially desirable stories? How can you avoid that? It's about honesty, and it's about being ready to call a spade a spade. And in this case, of course, it's really difficult to get through this barrier because you need to have a trusting environment when people can trust that if they say something, it won't be turned against them in the future. Is on the one hand, but on the other hand, there's some psychological defense. People are always on guard, and we use, in this case, the role models. In Smysloton, that's what we start with. We propose people that when they discuss values, they don't act on their own behalf. They speak for the group of 3. So one of the group of 3 is a speaker. So he tells you about what he or she understands under the value, this or that value. And another participant is going to be like an alien. He will ask some really silly and foolish questions. So that so-called alien has the psychological defense because they are not afraid to be a child. It's just a role. It's not Sergay Sergeyevich or Vasya or Ivan. It's just an alien. It's just a role that you play. And when you're asking these very foolish questions about values, and when this so-called conductor or the speaker is answering these questions, that's when you're able to discover new things. And also there's a third participant in the group, the observer. He observes, he or she observes the dialogue, and people delve into this dialogue, into this process. And they're like in the flow mode. It's like a trance mode, so they don't see what's happening around them. They are immersed into this process. And the third participant, the observer, he just puts notes. So it's like a collider when you speed up the particles and then you document different events. So we use this technique in order to overcome this initial barrier, this confusion, some social awkwardness, or the issue of socially acceptable answers. Great, thank you, Sergey. We also have another question from Tatiana, and I also have another question, a traditional question to you. So let's move on to Tatiana's question. Right. So just to speed up my answer, I'd like to get back to the case about the entrepreneurial spirit. We were able to see that there are many conflicts related to time planning, budget planning, human resources, assets, quotas, profits, and so on. So all these parameters are important for entrepreneurs, but for manager, it's important to do everything in time. Resources are needed. For entrepreneur, that's not important. Whether there are resources or not, there's a huge challenge, an interesting challenge, and I'm going to take the risk. So all these changes, all these differences, they create their own story. Thank you very much, Tatiana. I hope we were able to answer your question. And finally, in conclusion, thank you very much for this great talk. You told us about the roles, the stories, and when I was working on the subtitles, I really liked this video. I have a traditional question for you. They say that culture identifies the stories that we are telling and that we're reliving, but this story also defines the culture that creates us as people. What is more important for you, culture or the story? And you need to choose only one. It's the question about a hen and an egg. You're like in a cycle. What is kindness? Kindness is what kind people do. And who's a kind person? Kind person is someone who does kind deeds. When you work with discrepancies, with controversies, you need to solve the issue at another level. You cannot solve the issue at the level it was created. So I would do the following. There's a norm, and norm enables you to be effective, to effectively engage with people, to build trust, to create predictability. And there's also environment. Environment is ever-changing. Something always happens. And as a result, the norm changes. Story and culture, these are two forms of life, of norms life. So one notion is more abstract, is a wider notion than the other. So that's how I was able to understand what's important for my company. As for the story, I'd also say that story is about human beings. This approach is also the key approach. I often say that if there's a human being, there is an issue. And I'm saying it in a good meaning. And if there's an issue, there's a human being. And an issue does not always exist in our mind. So human beings, they create problems, but at the same time, human beings are those who are able to overcome these issues, to solve these issues. So any story, any transformation of the character that Robert McKee is saying, these changes that happen in the life of a character, it's about the step for development. It enables you to become better. Thank you very much, Sergey. I won't let you go until you answer me in one word. If you have to choose, what would you choose? You need to choose only one thing, culture or story. I would say story. Story is closer to a human being. I understood you. Dear friends, let's support Sergay. Push the flame, the fire emojis. So stay with us. We'll move on to the next speaker. Sergay, thank you. Thank you. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to see you, but I can see the flames, the fires. Thank you. Stay in touch.